Hi everyone, and welcome to this livecast. Navigate the data sovereignty maze from cloud first to cloud smart. My name is Alberto Valero, and I'm here moderating this event today from Espoo, Finland. Before we get started, let's go through some of the practicalities related to the platform. To guarantee the best user experience, we suggest using an up-to-date web browser and turning off your smart TV devices or VPN. If you're facing any difficulties, just check out the help button next to the screen or start a chat with the moderator. Feel free to share your thoughts, comments, or questions in the chat and take part in the polls. More instructions are available in the chat. Let's move on the topic of today. We will discuss how the changing data regulation is impacting organizations now and in the future. Hear from the European Union Commission regarding the regulatory outlook and get updated about Gaia-X. I'm also looking forward to our panel with Pan-Nordic panelists to hear how organizations can prepare for the data sovereign future. In the end of the session, we will also hear what sovereign cloud in practice means. We have some exciting keynotes coming up today. And the first one to take the stage is Salla Saastamoinen, Acting Director General in Directorate General for Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. The Directorate General's policy areas cover civil and commercial justice, criminal justice, fundamental rights and rule of law, equality, and union citizenship, and consumers. Relating to this topic, the Justice and Consumers Department is also responsible for the data and GDPR regulation. And consequently, Salla Saastamoinen gives us a high-level overview of the current regulatory outlook and viewpoints on what directions and changes to expect in the near future. Welcome, Salla.
Dear participant, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address you on behalf of the European Commission. The European Union is not only a single market, it's also a union of values. The EU has given us economic autonomy, and we work together to defend and uphold our shared values of democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. The same applies in the digital world. The EU is a major importer and exporter. Openness to trade and investment is a strength and the source of growth and resilience. But COVID-19 has shown disruptions in global supply chain and led to shortages of certain critical products in Europe. This is why we need to further improve our strategic autonomy in the key areas, as already set out in the EU's 2020 industrial strategy, updated earlier this year. Semiconductors on one hand and cloud and edge data processing technologies are key priorities for Europe in that respect. There are several regulatory elements to consider for public sector organizations, such as those present here today, when they want to increase their usage of cloud services. In the next minutes, I will talk about the data protection, other upcoming legislation in the field of data. First, there are data protection requirements, as you all know of the General Data Protection Regulation. As its recital 4 says, the processing of personal data should be designed to serve mankind. In that sense, data protection is about protecting people rather than data. It's about making sure that we can reap the benefits of using data with full respect of people's rights. What does that mean in practice for you as public sector organizations? In a nutshell, have a good reason for what you do it transparently, do it securely. The good reason is your delivery of public services in line with the mandates assigned to you by law. Transparency is also clear. People need to know why, how, and what for you are processing their data, who you are giving to it, and so on. Those two aspects are independent of whether you do the processing using your own capabilities in-house or use the services of an external cloud provider. It's the security part or where using cloud services demands additional attention. The GDPR does not stop you from using external service providers to support your service delivery. What it does say is that you, as the controllers of the processing, must indeed remain in control of processing when doing so. Its Article 28 lists certain elements that you must include in your contracts with your processors, those who process personal data on your behalf, such as obliging them to only process the data on your documented instructions, to take the required security measures, to assist you in your compliance obligations, for example, when reacting to the data breaches. And last but not least, what will happen with the data at the end of the service contract? On June this year, the Commission has adopted standard contractual clauses that you can use in your contracts with service providers. We have adopted versions of these clauses covering both intra-EU EA processors and processors outside of the European Union. They are available in our website, the Commission website. Beyond this, intense discussions are ongoing with the US administration to find a stable solution for transatlantic data transfers, following the judgment by the Court of Justice in the Schrems-II case. This remains a high priority on both sides. However, it is a complex matter requiring a careful assessment, and the only way to ensure legal certainty for the future is to find an arrangement that is fully in line with the case law of the Court of Justice. We cannot have a Schrems-III judgment that once more would invalidate an adequacy finding for the US. Second, the EU has a clear goal that European businesses and public sector should remain in control of their data, and such data should be processed according to our rules and values, including high standards of data protection and security. Therefore, the EU strategy for data has a list of regulatory, policy and investment actions. How and by whom data is managed can have a serious impact on our competitiveness and a way of life. The Commission is preparing a proposal for a Data Act, which we will adopt still this year. The Data Governance Act, which we proposed last year in November 2020, is now under discussion in the European Parliament and the Council. Both legislation aim to provide the framework for maximizing the reuse and sharing of data according to our values of respect of personal privacy, security while creating specific databases where the exchange of industrial data can be done in a secure, trusted, interoperable way across the European Union. The Data Governance Act aims to increase trust in data sharing by regulating organizations that bring demand and supply of data together. The Data Act will, among other points, address questions of the business-to-consumer and business-to-business data sharing in order to achieve a fair distribution of the value of data among stakeholders. However, the part of it most interesting to you as buyers of cloud services is that it will also look into facilitating switching between cloud service providers. Part of the fair marketplace for cloud services is to avoid vendor lock-in effects and to enable you as buyers to easily take your business elsewhere if you so wish. Thirdly, we expect public interest organizations and the public sector to play an important role in the implementation of the European strategy for data as project partners and/or public buyers of cloud solutions. The Commission is mobilizing all the funding instruments at its disposal to co-finance the development and de-deployment of the trustworthy, green and highly secure data processing technologies and common European data spaces as a priority in areas of public interest. More than 20% of the recovery plan for Europe is going to the digital sector, financing also cross-border investment projects. This is an unprecedented opportunity to strengthen our technological autonomy and includes contributions to a large-scale European initiative on the next generation cloud and the edge technologies. In the European Strategy for Data, the Commission also announced several policy actions to facilitate the access to trustworthy cloud and edge solutions for improving the delivery of public services to EU citizens and businesses, including by leveraging public procurement. To support these initiatives, the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud was launched on 19 July this year. It gathers all key actors across the data processing value chain, including member states' public authorities. The aim is to strengthen Europe's position in cloud and edge technologies and to leverage synergies for needed investments and provide expertise to enhance the governance of cloud solutions. The Alliance needs to be connected to national and global market developments and will identify the needed synergies with existing initiatives such as Gaia-X to realize its strategic vision for EU's data leadership. In conclusion, GDPR-compliant use of cloud services is possible, and the standard contractual clauses adopted this summer provide an easy-to-use for controller when they be public or private sector entities in that compliance work. Going ahead, we address additional aspects of the data economy with proposals that are already out and still in the pipeline. We will also financially support the development and deployment of trustworthy, green and highly secure data processing technologies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sala Sastamoinen, for taking the time and sharing with us in the Nordics all the way from Brussels. We had some learnings from this pitch from Sala. The importance of protecting European Union shared values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And what I like the most, when she said that data protection is about, indeed, protecting people, not just protecting data. So it's about the people. Our next keynote is about Gaia-X. Now it's actually a good time to reflect on this initiative. Make sure to answer the poll. Do you know what is Gaia-X? We will review the results after our next keynote. And while you're answering the poll, I will introduce to you today Francesco Bonfiglio, CEO of Gaia-X. With more than 30 years of experience in the business of consulting and information technology, Francesco brings his knowledge of the cloud and data market needs, and his vision on how Gaia-X will revolutionize it. Francesco, happy to have you live on the line.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well, and thank you very much for the introduction. So in my 10 minutes, I wanted to tell you as much as possible to ensure the survey will produce good results in terms of, do you know what Gaia-X is? I think you have read a lot about it and heard a lot about it. Sometimes you read also not very nice articles. And I think the reason is that we are doing something really unprecedented, new, some way, somehow complex to understand, but extremely important. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is what is the role of Gaia-X versus the European data strategy that Sala anticipated in the previous keynote. So let me start with that. This is the European data strategy in large terms. So what the European data strategy wants to achieve is basically create a common European market of data. That means enabling the free flow of data across Europe. And this is necessary to produce any value that we can produce out of data. To do that, we need to have, first of all, the ability to find high quality data, because without high quality data, we cannot produce high quality services. And that's part of the strategy. But in order to produce high quality data value using high quality data, we need to circulate those data, make them available. And therefore, we need rules to get access and use data in a fair, practical, and clear way. And these rules have to obey and adhere to the European principles and rules that basically govern any citizen, any good, and anything about circulation of value across Europe. So the European strategy of data is to make data available and ensure this data can be circulated freely, be accessible in a sovereign way, and respecting the law of Europe's and the principle of Europe, as well as any citizen or any other good does. Now, if you look at the key milestones of this digital strategy, we can certainly remember February 2020 when the European strategy was announced. And this was very simple as a message: create a new single market for data. Then everybody knows what happened during the last year and a half. And the COVID crisis produced redirection of the investments into the recovery funds. These recovery funds is 750 billion euros, 20% of which goes to digital only. There is just two interventions in these recovery funds with a fixed minimum threshold of investments, which is digital and green. So this, again, is an unprecedented signal from Europe on the importance of digital, which resembles the importance of the green transition. Then another important step in October 2020, when the member states declared their common intent to build a common European cloud. And the European Alliance for Industrial Data and Cloud, at that time this was the name, now it's a European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud, was constituted with the intent to build a new generation of cloud for Europe, which will then result into the famous IPSAI, the important project for common European interest that is been starting and will create a new generation of infrastructure. Then we had the Digital Compass, everybody knows, that focuses on skills to give the direction of this digital transition in the digital decade and strategy of Europe. And the four focus areas are skills, business, government, and infrastructures, of course. And now, Gaia-X was born in 1919. It was born like a federal project, right? The German ministry became a Franco-German project funded by the ministries of France and Germany. And in 2020, the decision was made to make it a European international association and open to every member state and also to other members that are not European. And in 2021, the AESBL, the Association Internationale Sans But Lucrative, were constituted. So we are pretty young in terms of constitution and concretely in terms of work. But our growth has been linear and in sync with the European data strategy. Now, if we look at the digital decade objective, so this digital decade is going to mark an important step in the transformation of Europe. The key element driving this digital decade is the so-called computing continuum. In other words, we need to bring the cloud to the edge and the edge to the cloud to build a new generation of cloud where basically the network of devices, data centers, different types of clouds, and the different shapes of clouds from the HPC to the edge to the far edge, etc., will be connected in a sort of forest, in a sort of network. The cloud today does not allow for this paradigm. And that's why you can see not just Gaia-X, but every cloud provider around the world is moving in the direction of changing their architecture, because this is no more compatible with this paradigm of compute continuum. The objective of this digital decade is to build at least 10,000 edge nodes by 2030. But the most important is to reach 75% of cloud penetration in Europe, because you have to be aware the problem of Europe now is that the cloud penetration is just about 26%. Now, again, so what is the role of Gaia-X within this European data strategy? If you think about the European data strategy, you now see three main pillars. One is the creation of these common data spaces. Another one is the creation of a new cloud infrastructure. And the third one, very important, is the concrete implementation of these new cloud infrastructure through a high impact project, the IPSI CIS that I was talking about. Now, Gaia-X stands in the middle of the creation of data spaces and the creation of a new generation of cloud infrastructure that implements the principle of transparency, sovereignty, interoperability. And this is actually the beauty of this project that now sees more than 300 members participating, all around the same intent. So why Gaia-X? Let me spend just a few minutes on this. We need to understand that data economy is not just a business for IT people. So for too long, we have been believing that technology and IT is just a portion of the business. This is not true. The data economy is developed through the platforms economy. The platform economy is enabled by the platforms, which are aggregate of technology that allow to collect data, apply algorithms, and build the so-called smart services that transform analog or physical ecosystems into digital ecosystems. In order to do all these things, you need the cloud. In other words, if we didn't have the cloud, nothing would exist in terms of platform, nothing would exist in terms of data economy as we mean today. So the cloud is the very first ingredient. Per se, is like salt. You need it everywhere, but you cannot cook a dish just with salt. And that's why cloud is so important. But let's move a little bit further down. What are we talking about? We are talking about a business that in 2025, this is Eurostat data, will be around 850 billion euros. That means around 90% of the GDP of Europe. And if you think about that, the indirect value produced by data is much bigger than that. And you can think about any product today, any car, any device, any equipment you have at home, from the fridge to the oven, is basically enriched with value produced by data. You can easily understand that the overall economy of data is not just the one produced by data companies, system integrators, technology vendors, cloud service providers, but is a much broader portion that will become possibly, and this is my own prediction, 30 to 40, if not more, % of the GDP in just 5 years. Now, if that is true, we need to be aware of where we are. So Europe is owning nowadays roughly 5% of the overall market capitalization of data companies, listed data companies. This is a research from Gartner. Now, what that means is that the overall amount of the economy of data, no, strictly speaking, not, but it's absolutely proportional. In fact, this number is very close to the real number of ownership of data economy by European company. This tells us three things. First of all, data economy is real economy. Our lives, our employments, what our sons will study at university in just a few years will depend on how much we become sovereign in terms of technology now in these next 5 to 10 years in Europe. Otherwise, we will become hostage of technology and providers that are not European, but this is not even the biggest problem, but they are not controlled by basically our jurisdiction. And they will impact our economy in a way that we have no idea. And the second thing that this tells us is that we have a negligible position, so we have to do something. The third message that this tells us is that the data economy is built through data, and data is the only raw material that can be reproduced. In Europe, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of high quality data, and we don't have a problem of good data. We are simply feeding other data economies with our raw material. So we need to revert that flow back in order to succeed. We don't need to do anything special. To do that, we need Gaia-X. So what is Gaia-X? Gaia-X aims to create a new ecosystem for innovation for Europe, where it is possible, and we incentivize the creation of new digital services through data sovereignty. So through the control of our data, to the control of how technologies treat our data in order to be trustable, and reducing the dependencies from non-sovereign, non-European technologies. This is our objectives. And the reason is that we want to move from a old, actual model of cloud where everything is concentrated, proprietary, so not interoperable, and opaque, so not controllable, into a new model of cloud that is distributed because it follows the paradigm of data gravity, because data is spread across the world, so cloud cannot be more distributed, has to be concentrated, it has to be distributed. That is open, so that provides interoperability, and it is transparent, so provide trust and sovereignty. This is what we mean by trust and sovereignty. And basically, we want to move from a model where we let someone control our data into a model where we get back control of our data. In other terms, we want to move from a one-way model into a roundabout model. And this one-way model is the one that limits nowadays the cloud penetration in Europe from that 20 to 25%, which means in turns that 80% of our data and our applications are not in the cloud. And if 80% of our data are not in the cloud, we cannot not talk about any growth of the digital economy, as per what I said before. So how we do it? This is the famous X model. The X is just a paradigm to show two sides of this world. On the top side, we have the data, the so-called data spaces, which are the numerical representation of the ecosystems we live, we work, we communicate. And the bottom side of the X is the infrastructures. So the cloud, the private, the public, the on-premises, the edge, the far edge, the high-performance computing, whatever it is and whatever it will be. We at Gaia-X, we are building a middle layer that is capable to connect different nodes of computing dislocated in different areas and provide for three basic elements. Transparency, so you can inspect the service and understand what's in it through common declarators. Control the service, which is sovereignty, so decide what type of service you want to use, what are the characteristics of the service you want to use. Exactly when you buy a product or when you buy a service, you want to know exactly what this offers and you decide based on that. And the third is interoperability, so ensuring that when you buy a service, you can move to another service, you can decide to take your workload off, move them away, or even better, make your workloads and your data interoperate with others that are in different areas. So this is what we aim and we are developing in Gaia-X. What we do, this is another key question. We, first of all, are not a formal standardization body. We are not a software or hardware platform, and we are not a runtime implementation of any Gaia-X service. I'm talking about the AESBL. So the association is not gonna be a market operator. We are a single point of definition of the Gaia-X architecture and rules. We are making an open implementation of these rules available to all through an open source project. And we are going to be a qualification authority for the Gaia-X compliance. The Gaia-X project is driven by the Gaia-X Association. The Gaia-X architecture is developed by the AESBL member. The Gaia-X services are not operated by the AESBL. So this is the difference between the AESBL, which is Asociación Internacional Sans-Título Cooperative, so the legal entity behind Gaia-X, if you want, the one that I am the CEO of, and the Gaia-X project. Sometimes this is confusing, so I wanted to clarify. And most importantly, what we deliver. We deliver three things. One is the specification. So typically the technical architecture document, the architectural standard, the specifications, the policy rules. This is documents. We describe what we are doing through these documents. Two, we develop it. So we are developing open source project to make the key components of Gaia-X available and in such a way they can be used as a toolkit to implement these mechanisms of transparency, interoperability, etc., but also to control the services. So there will be a part of this code that will be used as a toolkit, another part that will be running in a decentralized way and will be there to control, to inspect all the services that are published on the Gaia-X, let me say, registry, to ensure they are compliant. And the third deliverable is the labels. So we provide labels that certify basically the Gaia-X compliance. Now, let me quickly go to an end where we are. We have 300 members plus from 25 countries, almost 2,000 people working together on the same intent, 20 international working teams, all working together to make this possible. We have set up a management team. We have enabled working groups. We have created a lot of hubs. We have 15 hubs. So we have done a lot of work just in this last few months. And we are following our 5 years outlook. And the first year was the setup year where we wanted to start describing the architecture in much more detail. We are delivering the third release of the architecture. We wanted to start developing the Federation services. We are delivering the Federation services specification in a couple of weeks. And we wanted to start the first data space projects. And we are working to deliver by the end of the year the first Gaia-X Federation, the Gaia-X compliant services through some projects like Catena-X, which is a specific data space project around the automotive data space. The 5 years outlook is here to bridge the gap we have from this 4% to a more decent 30, 40%, hopefully more. The first part of this 5 year, the ASBL will push. The second part, we expect the market to pull, because if what we are developing is interesting, the market will ask for it. And let me go quickly through this slide. Just one slide at the end on the news. We have a summit coming in the 18th and 19th of November. Please make sure you book your time. This will be an incredible opportunity to see the progress of our work, the vision, where we are, talk about the minimum viable product, and hear the voice from the hubs that are working on different data spaces, and see a technology focus, and also hear from the voice of policymakers and governments that are supporting our initiative. So I hope I gave you a good opportunity to understand a little bit more of Gaia-X. And with that said, I pass the floor to you.
So, thanks, Francesco. That was really illustrating. And we learned from the polls what is actually the state of knowledge about Gaia-X. So guess what was the response? 50% of the people didn't know what Gaia-X is about. And 25 only partially. So definitely this was needed, Francesco. So any comment on that?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I'm spending most of my time describing Gaia-X. As I said, it's a pretty recent project if you think about it, but I hope at least I managed to explain the complexity of it. And any complex thing, unfortunately, is complex to understand. But we are doing something very complex, very unprecedented. And let me just add one last comment. For the first time in life, Europe is leading the innovation on technology. And this is not trivial. And we are doing it in a very open way. So managing the different opinion and views of 300 plus members is not easy, but it's the European way of doing things, and we are succeeding in it.
Great, thank you so much. So Europe leading for digital sovereignty. Thanks, Francesco, for being with us today and sharing the insight about this initiative.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
So, next, we are going to hear from the Nordic organizations and authority representatives how they have been dealing with this data regulatory maze. So here in the studio from Finland, with me I have Maria Rautavirta, Director of Data Business Unit from the Finnish Ministry of Transport and Communications. Welcome, Maria. We also have Petteri Minalainen, CIO of the insurance company Fennia. Welcome, Petteri.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And remotely joining us all the way from Sweden, Jörgen Sandström, Chief Digital Officer of the city of Västerås. Welcome, Jörgen.
Thank you.
And a little bit more west, Norway, Nancy Jueliu, Data Protection Officer of Diakonhjemmet, if I pronounce that more or less right. Welcome. Then we also have Taito von Konou, our special advisor for the Finnish tax agency. Vero, welcome, Taito.
Thank you.
So warm welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us today. Let's jump straight to the topic. I'll start with you, Maria. Question for you. Today we have heard both from Sala Sastamoinen. She was telling us about the European Union level regulation. And then we heard from Francesco Bonfiglio regarding Gaia-X. Can you tell us a bit more from the government regulator perspectives, in this case Finland, and as a European Union influencer and active member of Gaia-X initiative, what is happening in the Finnish government level?
Yes, very delighted to be here. And as already heard from the previous speakers, there is an enormous amount of work done and will be done in the regulative layer. But we in Finland have been active participants ever since our presidency in 2019, and the European data strategy actually reflects a lot of that work we did during that presidency. So we are involved in every element and initiative in EU level and also in the Gaia-X Finnish hub. And our main goal is to deliver this all. So we have to be certain that the Finnish companies see their position, utilize the benefits, and be on the market for the scalable European data services. So the basic work we do is to be participating actively in this. And of course, the human centricity has been from the start the Finnish point of view. So bringing the My Data approach that has been a Finnish initiative since 2014 has been a major breakthrough for us that now it's established in the data strategy so well.
Good. And maybe a follow-up question for you as well, Maria. What value do you think that Gaia-X is going to bring to the societies, especially in the Nordics?
Yes, this has been the hardest part to explain in the policy language. So we have to go deeper, not talking only about what we want to achieve, but how we want to achieve it. And there we come to the architectures and the structures of infrastructure, both in data, but in digital as a whole. So Gaia-X is building data structures, but it's also a community where government and businesses can together jointly develop the networked networks, as explained by Mr. Bonfiglio very well.
Great, thank you for that. Now let's move to Sweden. Jörgen.
Yes.
How do you in Sweden, especially in the public administration, navigate these data regulations related to data compliance and use of cloud services?
It's an interesting question because I can't really navigate. As a local administration, I'm a part of a world that hasn't made decisions about how we can actually navigate, and I need that help actually to not live in this uncertainty that we are living in right now. And there is a big uncertainty, especially with Schrems and how to manage to use cloud services in a correct and useful way. And so what I have to do is find a way to secure the steps that we already has taken, because we have been taking steps earlier, and you can't go back really. That is not possible, or it is possible, but it's not maybe very clever. But we have to avoid making new changes into cloud services, and that costs us. We can't develop in the way that we want, and we are stuck with a little bit more of old technology and services than we want. And we also, in this way, also have to discuss with our suppliers about how to make intermediate solutions instead of going all the way into the smart solutions, and that is, it's not a good thing.
Good, thanks, Jürgen. So now talking about navigating the maze, let's check maybe as a practical example on how the changing regulations have impacted organizations. For that, let's continue with Petteri here in Finland. At Fenia, you are going through a large cloud transformation. Could you share with us how the process is going and what impact has Schrems-II had on your cloud journey decisions?
That's a quite broad topic. I try to be quite brief, but first of all, to frame a bit about the transformation, it's kind of a four-part question that we are kind of industrializing and optimizing our current business environment and the applications where we operate our current business. The second part is building our own capabilities and competencies. And third part is to actual moving to the public cloud in a kind of a greenfield environment with SaaS cloud native applications. And the fourth part is then the actual migration gradually. And I think the Schrems part has affected two areas mainly, and that is the kind of industrialization and optimization of our current services. We had an ongoing or in-flight project where we were outsourcing and consolidating our services, and we utilized labor arbitrage in that deal. And of course, when the Schrems came into effect, we had to kind of evaluate how the data is accessed from our partners that are using labor arbitrage, and that impacted our timelines with few months. And at that point, it was so fresh that it was really difficult to get the kind of information and practical advice. And of course, the kind of decisions or maybe even court decisions already made in Europe made us very wary of the situation. And the second main part is that we have this kind of a cloud first, SaaS first strategy, and for building the new environment and going heavily utilizing SaaS services from public cloud, we had to take quite strict measures in approaching the new environment, building the new environment or new platform. And actually, that was also had a impact that our timelines with couple of months, and I would say that at least, reserve 3 months at minimum to take care of these situations with due diligence. So that's basically how it affected. We had to pause our in-flight projects and take a step back and think about how we will address these issues and ensure that we can handle the EU subject data in different situations within the legal framework.
Great. So basically, understand your data is very important in order to make the right cloud choices. But when talking about digital services leadership, it's well known that the Finnish tax administration, Taito, is leading the digital intensity services and the adoption of cloud for that. Can you tell us how you have managed to adopt intensive use of public cloud services with minimal data risks?
Yes. Thank you, Alberto, and thank also for your beautiful words about tax administration. I'm Taito Kunovan. I work for our legal unit, and I'm also our Vice Data Protection Officer. Maybe first some words about our role or position. Actually, we are a public actor, and we have personal data of all taxpayers. So that amount is almost about 5 million. So we are maybe the biggest, or one of the biggest controllers in Finland. There's a broad legal obligation also to provide information for taxation. So from a data processing perspective, we are maybe in a different position with the private sector. When we organize data processing and use new technology, we have also created strong trust and also notice requirement of transparency. But it must also be borne in mind that data processing must same time be efficient and support taxation in the changing environment. As the amount of data increase, it's almost mandatory to use processing methods that achieve also results. And in this situation, we are talking about cloud transformation and the risk also associated with it. We know all the legislation and court cases related to the processing of personal data in cloud environment. Maybe I can say that on our journey, I have emphasized that we are aware of our own risk, and highlight own risk associated with the use of new technology. The idea of own risk may be very simple, but in general, I mean that you have to have knowledge of your own operating environment and what you are doing, and also legal affiliations, and have ability to answer questions related, for example, EU law decisions. One example is that we have addressed the risk of US Cloud Act, so that maybe so that our competence is in Finland, and we are not intended to transfer information outside our own administration, and we try our best to keep information in our own environment. But in that case, we can also add that we have information exchange agreements, for example, with US. So if the US or maybe US authorities don't have to apply Cloud Act when they just can call us and ask the data they need if there is some case they have. But what comes to question, I think that the basic risks are the same. Everybody have same risk coming from legislation and coming from court decision. But the possible realization of those risks does not necessarily endanger same rights and freedom of persons, because when we are public actor, we are in different positions, so maybe the risk evaluation is a little bit different. Thank you.
Thank you, Taito. Now that you touch upon the risk management of data, I would like to go back to Norway. Nancy, as a Chief Data Protection Officer in a health and research organization, what methodology of data risk assessments do you use? Can you share with us a little bit of those best practices?
Yes, actually, we also following the guidance from the Norwegian Data Protection Authority. We have a kind of the basic template that using the severity and the frequency or this kind of score to evaluate. But the core part for the risk assessment for us, I think it's to building up a checklist for the potential risks for different kind of contexts. And for that, we have built up several kind of checklists for different kind of contexts based upon the internet, the e-health department's industry standard for information security and data protection, especially for example, our hospital. So it's for the e-health sectors. So we have special checklist for the potential risks for example, for use of cloud, for use of databases, and for use of social media, etc. So that's something I think it's very useful for us to building up the checklist. For building up a checklist for the risk assessment. And for the health, for our university, we also use for the research and for the different kind of systems we use. We have some checklists and guidelines from the Uninet. They have given us a lot of guidance on that, and we also extend our checklist according to our own experiences and according to the cases that the new cases happened or lessons we learned from other hospitals, from other sectors. So I think for risk assessment, the core part is to building up a very good checklist for the project managers and for the system owners to do their risk assessments. Yeah. So that's.
Thank you. So that brings me to the topic of simplicity. Make it simple and easy to follow procedures when it comes to data risk assessment. And talking about that point, you have mentioned earlier, Petteri, that you have done a full audit on your data and data classification. Can you elaborate beyond that?
Sure. It's kind of an ongoing and continuous process because we need to know which regulation impacts which data and therefore which systems, and then how to take that into account when doing contracts, for example. And then again, it's for our cloud transformation. It was quite essential because we needed to know, and we need to know that which role need to have which kind of visibility and access to the data and information in the new environment. And we have then used and will be using it to ensure the kind of up to field level access and visibility to different kind of information based on the role or geography, and we can control that. And then again, otherwise it will be very using hard encryption otherwise with the private key network. So it's a kind of a solution to ensure that the data is duly protected. But of course, the ongoing part for current applications as well is that there are other regulation besides the kind of data protection that we had to adhere, whether it's the kind of a EU level or local authority financial regulation that we have to apply to. So we have a multitude of different regulation that we have to adhere, and then again there are changes and updates coming, and we try to keep up with the kind of a registry of where we are standing with the different kind of applications and data. So that's briefly the process.
Thank you, Petteri. And thinking about the nature of the users that we have, particularly in your case, Nancy, you have a lot of researchers which do global research. And for that, they need to exchange information with others at a global level. So for you, what do you consider to be the most challenging requests that you get from the people in your organization?
Yes, I think the most challenging request is also concerning the data transfer issues outside the EA areas. So we have collaboration institutions in the United States, universities, and some research institutions in Australia, for example. So when this happens, we usually very struggle to how to comply with the GDPR's requirements, and simultaneously do the research and to make it work. So most of the time for the hospitals, we will try to avoid this, but sometimes we still need this kind of collaborations, and we have to try to anonymize the data as much as possible. But so that comes to another challenge for us, that what is anonymous enough to fulfill the requirements of the GDPR standard. So because for some health research, they need to know the age of the people, for example, and they need to know the gender, and they need to know a little bit something else. So many factors together. So we have to ensure it's still broad enough not to identify the people. So that's something challenging for us. And for the universities, I think challenging comes to international teaching programs that exchange through a digital platform, and we have some international teaching programs, and so the students get some courses from aboard for example, institution from United States, and they have to talk about something during the platform, and there might be some exchange of course, of the personal information. Although we, as a institution, we don't directly, as data controller, to transfer this data, but they are our students, and it's an international teaching program. We provide it to our students. So there's some responsibility for us to inform students what to talk, what not to talk, and something else, and how to use the digital platform, and not to record it in the cloud, for example, in the Teams or something like that. So that's a lot of challenges for us with these aspects. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. Definitely a challenging environment for you with the intensity of research and innovation that there is in your field. But then going to Taito again, as a data law expert, how do you recommend the collaboration with a chief digital officer or CIO so they can accelerate the digitalization of services with control and safety?
Yeah, thanks. My experience is that although it's when you are planning cloud transformation and making assessment on, it's a technological solution, but the risk assessment always requires that the people involved have ability to reconcile legislation and technological solution and to the actions that have planned. So therefore, shortly, I would call for experts who are familiar with the operating environment, and also engineers and lawyers who get along with each other. So that's
nice.
Shortly.
Engineers and lawyers who get along with each other. That's the future, definitely. So talking about lawyers and contracts and all of that, Jörgen in Sweden, are there, when we sign contracts with cloud service providers, are there any limitations in those agreements in order to implement fully all the aspects of data compliance regulation?
Of course there is. The big, especially the big American companies like Apple and Microsoft is not very keen on making special agreements for the city of Västerås or for another city. They want to have it like streamlined agreements, and the agreements today is actually not built from the demands that are laid on us to follow. And that is not okay. And I think the only place where they actually have made some little movement in that is in Holland, that I heard some years ago. And I think that is also an issue that we have to address, to see that we have commercial agreements with these companies that actually allows us to follow the regulations that are put upon us and so on. And it's not big things that have to be done, but now today it's actually impossible. So it's
So hopefully we'll get some help from the dialogues happening at the European Commission level with those global companies. So interesting.
They are crucial for the uncertainty.
Yep. So we need to get a lot of guidance from there. Hey, we are summing up the panel. But I want to make a final question to each and every one of our panelists, and I'm going to ask you for extreme brevity. Give me a headline only. So think about one sentence, and I'm going to go around the table. What is your one sentence recommendation to the audience to navigate this data sovereignty maze? And I'll start with you, Nancy. One sentence.
Well, that would be quite difficult, I think. Still, following the guidance and do the risk assessment, I think. Yeah.
Data risk assessment. Good. Jürgen.
The uncertainty will disappear one day, and there is a lot of preparation that you can do anyway when you're waiting on that.
Good. Taito?
I would say that know your environment and get good enough expert to help to justify what you are doing.
Good. Petri?
I would say that collaboration internally and externally with experts and authorities early enough.
Very good. So that takes us to the authorities' point of view. Maria, last but not least, from the government perspective.
Yes, I would say the courage to walk the talk. So although we are waiting for some decisions from EU, you can still start raising awareness of your data possessions, start using the cloud, start sharing your data with your partners, and start building the data capacities.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for all the panelists for joining today, sharing your insights. And now we are going to be moving to a different perspective, which is the technology industry advisors. Let's get the view from VMware and TietoEVRY experts. We have with us Patrick Verhoeven, Global Director of Multi-Cloud Strategy at VMware. And we have Julia Filipovic, compliance expert from TietoEVRY. They will share with us a couple of reflections around sovereign cloud. Patrick and Julia, over to you.
All right, thank you, Alberto. I really appreciate that and really excited to be here today. So what I wanted to do this morning is just give you VMware's perspective around sovereign cloud, right? And from our perspective, sovereign cloud is all about the data, right? It's about protecting and unlocking critical data. That could be sensitive national data, that could be corporate intellectual property, or it could be personally identifiable information, for example. And the sovereign cloud really isn't a new concept. It's been around in the cloud industry for some years, but it's really gained renewed importance in the last couple of years for a couple of key reasons, right? And from the VMware perspective, those key reasons are the following. Number one is a growing recognition that when we use hyperscale public clouds like AWS or Azure, all of your data may not necessarily remain on sovereign soil, right? The hyperscalers make a really important distinction between customer data versus metadata, right? Or your account information. And if you read their privacy statements, right, they reserve the right to store that metadata in any location, including in the United States. So that really causes a bit of a yellow flag for many data privacy officers. Another change that we've seen in the industry is the idea of foreign access to that critical data. So for example, in 2018 here in the United States, there was some legislation passed called the US Cloud Act. And the US Cloud Act basically says that US authorities can assert jurisdictional control over data from any cloud provider that is subject to US jurisdiction, right? So that means that US courts, US law enforcement, US security agencies now can potentially assert authority over data that sits in any cloud region in the world, right? So that's another concern. Now, beyond those two critical dimensions, right, and another key trend that we're starting to see in the industry now is increasingly policy leaders are also starting to think about digital sovereignty, right? So for example, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron, have both talked about this concept of digital dependency on the US and digital dependency on US operators. and the need to really fuel economic growth within the EU and really to drive digital innovation, right? These are one of the key themes that Francisco was talking about in one of his earlier sessions this morning. And kind of along the same lines, right, what we're also starting to see in more and more is a growing need to deliver social value back to our local communities and back to our local economies, right? More and more RFPs that we start to see today in the industry really have that as a key requirement. So from the VMware perspective, right, these are really the drivers that have put a spotlight on the renewed importance of sovereign cloud. Next slide. Now, just to illustrate that a little further, IDC recently conducted some research with about 500 customers globally in regulated industries. So think of government and financial services and healthcare. And what you see here are some of the results of that survey. So for example, 69% of those respondents feel that when using public clouds, right, their confidential data is extremely vulnerable. Over 40% of them express concerns about, working with US cloud providers because of the Cloud Act, or even because of the changing geopolitical landscape, right, where traditional alliances have come under pressure a little bit over the last few years. And what we also see is that these customers are looking for a better alternative, right? 63% of them say that they're looking for a cloud solution that gives them complete jurisdictional and exclusive jurisdictional control and authority over their data, right? So this is just really puts a spotlight on the fact that we need to be thinking carefully about our applications and our data, and we need to be deploying the right data into the right cloud, especially in those regulated industries. Next slide. So given that market context, right, here's kind of how VMware thinks about sovereign clouds, right? So from our perspective, a sovereign cloud provider needs to have a whole series of capabilities that kind of build on one another. At the very center here, you see kind of what we would expect of a sovereign cloud, right? And this is all about the things that I just spoke about. It's all about data sovereignty and having exclusive jurisdictional control over our data, right? This is where we mitigate the risk of foreign access to our data. And this is also where we make sure that all data, including metadata, remains on sovereign soil. Now, the second circle that you see here is the next set of capabilities that we need to be thinking about, because honestly, a sovereign cloud is more than just about data sovereignty, right? We have to ensure data integrity, right? For example, being able to provide appropriate backup and disaster recovery solutions, right? Being able to provide storage solutions, immutable storage that prevent data from being tampered with, right? Being able to provide secure private network connectivity into the environment. So there's a whole set of requirements just around data access and integrity. And similarly, we also have a set of requirements around data security and compliance, right? Every sovereign cloud needs to minimally meet certain security certifications and attestations. Every sovereign cloud needs to have a core set of capabilities that enable things like encryption or microsegmentation. So there's a whole set of requirements just around how do we protect that data and ensure compliance. And the third requirement that you see here from the VMware perspective is a sovereign cloud also needs to give customers data independence and interoperability, right? It's increasingly important to prevent cloud vendor lock-in, right? And to make sure that customers have the freedom to move their data and move their applications as needed between cloud environments. That is another key requirement. And so from the VMware perspective, these first four requirements are really the essence of what a sovereign cloud is. Now, there's a fifth capability here, which is really more about data innovations, analytics, and insights. That certainly is becoming very, very important. So, we do encourage and believe that VMware cloud providers need to build these capabilities or need to be able to extend services into a hyperscale data center to enable those capabilities. But at its very essence, right, the way that VMware defines a sovereign cloud is it's about protecting and unlocking the value of critical data, and we do that through these first four categories, right? So that's how VMware essentially thinks about sovereign cloud. So the last thing I wanted to talk about this morning is to share with all of you that a couple of weeks ago at VMworld 2021, we announced a new VMware Sovereign Cloud initiative. And this initiative is specifically designed to recognize all of the work that VMware cloud providers are doing today around sovereign cloud, right? All of those cloud providers that have sovereign clouds available to customers today. And certainly that initiative is a fairly rigorous process where we have a long set of commercial and technical requirements that our partners must meet in order to become designated as a VMware sovereign cloud provider. And the good news here, I think, for all of you is that, for the Nordics, TietoEVRY is the first cloud service provider in VMware to really be recognized and to receive that VMware Sovereign Cloud designation, right? So for all of you that have, critical sensitive data, regulated workloads that are looking to mitigate the risk of foreign access, they're looking to ensure that all of your data remains on sovereign soil, TietoEVRY would be an excellent partner for you to work with. And with that said, what I want to do next is really hand the presentation off to Julia, who's going to talk about a real-world case study of how we protect sensitive, regulated data. Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, for introducing the Sovereign Cloud framework. Next, I'll show you a possible scenario of how cloud adoption could work in practice, provide some guidance and debunk uncertainty around cloud security and compliance. In this case, I'm presenting a typical bank and its challenges as a more traditional organization that has not yet migrated to the cloud. Its challenges vary from its products and services becoming less profitable, less effective, to modernizing the current environment at the pace the organization needs. Since the bank's environment is highly regulated, it's crucial that it's continually compliant with applicable laws and regulations. Besides, the bank is lacking the necessary resources that can address everything specified above. Therefore, the bank engaged an external expert to do a complete examination of the environment in order to deduce which cloud is the right one and also advise on how to embark on their cloud transformation journey. First of all, let's focus on data classification. Then, I'll consider a suitable cloud provider selection. And finally, I'll highlight what I see as the main points of cloud transformation. During this assessment, a great deal of time was dedicated to data classification, linkages to applications, and data circulation across the environment. There are three different types of data in this illustration. High sensitivity data, for instance, financial records, would have a catastrophic impact on the organization if it is compromised. Medium sensitivity data, intended for internal use only, wouldn't have a catastrophic impact if it is compromised. Low sensitivity data, for instance, public website content, intended for public use and wouldn't have much impact if it is breached. Data classification represents the first essential step in cloud transformation strategy and helps the bank comply with relevant local, regional, and national regulatory mandates. Before moving to the cloud, the next step is to understand data flows and conduct a data protection impact assessment. This includes describing the nature, scope, context, and purposes of the processing, assessing the necessity and the proportionality of data processing, identifying and evaluating risks, and scrutinizing any additional measures to mitigate those risks. A combination of skilled resources, the right technology solutions, and a robust set of processes is crucial in achieving this. As part of this assessment, considering the customer requirements, it's important to address data residency and sensitivity, along with security and compliance. And we have to understand that different cloud providers have certain levels of risk associated with this. There is no doubt that the Nordic-owned and Nordic-operated cloud providers governed by EU laws are associated with lower risk, as it is depicted at the bottom of this vertical line. Here, I would like to draw your attention to a couple of vital points associated with data sovereignty and jurisdictional control. First of all, it is a need to keep data and workloads in the EU. As a second one, this avoids being subject to non-EU laws and data requests. Since data resides in a data center in the EU, no foreign authorities can assert any claims. From data security and compliance perspective, there are several significant points to consider. Sovereign cloud provider guarantees that all operation teams involved in the service delivery are in the EU areas. Cloud providers, employees, and operators cannot compromise customers' data and workloads. Data encryption at rest and network encryption in transit are designed in accordance with adequate data protection mechanism and remains under the control of the customer or the trusted sovereign cloud provider within the EU. Security controls are designed and certified against sector-specific standards and are in compliance with local, regional, national regulations and requirements. Data sovereignty, data integrity, and data security controls are audited annually by a third party. Moving along the vertical line to the top, the degree of the risk on the increase. Cloud providers governed by a jurisdiction outside the EU are associated with higher risk, since a significant level of jurisdictional risk might be caused by a potential conflict of laws between EU and, for instance, the US. However, it doesn't mean that the use of cloud services offered by US cloud providers should always be considered taboo or unlawful. After all, foreign hyperscalers are played sort of an indispensable role in acceleration of digital transformation. On the contrary, the use of such cloud services depends on meticulous planning and implementation of extensive measures to mitigate and reduce the initial level of supply risk effectively. After conducting the proper data classification, understanding data flows and the appropriate measures required to address security and compliance, and assessing the level of supplier risk, the bank considered entering into an agreement with a Nordic cloud provider regarding setting up a multi-cloud environment. It was agreed to keep mission-critical data hosted in a sovereign cloud to comply with local legislation and data privacy policies, while maintaining a public cloud for hosting public-facing web services to save costs, make operation more efficient, and get instant access to cloud innovations. Let me just run over the key points once again. Think carefully about your data and applications. Engage a trusted sovereign partner who can guide you on that journey and help you define the scope and requirements. Implement the functionality that address security and compliance. Enable advanced management and orchestration between public and private clouds, and evaluate the results. Collaboration with a trusted advisor can help you navigate through any possible complex issues and deploy the right data, workloads into the right cloud, and together move in the right direction to achieve more enhanced state. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Patrick and Julia. That was really eye-opening, at least to me. So we got a few questions. I think we have a little bit of time to go through a couple of those. Being a bit provocative, Patrick, I think this one will go for you. Are we then suggesting that organizations, in the light of this European regulation for data protection, should not use hyperscale public clouds such as Google, AWS, or Azure?
Yeah, Alberto, that's a great question. My response would be no, right? On the contrary, what I would say is the idea of a sovereign cloud, right? Sovereign clouds are part of the emerging multi-cloud ecosystem and landscape, right? And for the audience members here today, really my message would be recognize that not all clouds are equal. And we need to be thoughtful about deploying the right apps and the right data into the right cloud. So as we've talked about here today, right, for regulated workloads, for critical sensitive national data, right, sovereign clouds are going to give you better control, right? They're going to mitigate the risk of foreign access. They're going to ensure that all data remains on sovereign soil. But for some of the other types of data that we have, right, Nancy talked about anonymized data, or Yulia talked about low sensitive data, public data, right, where maybe we do want to leverage the benefits that AWS or Azure or GCP might provide around machine learning or AI models, for example. And that's why I think the key thing here for the audience is the industry is changing, right? What we're starting to see, and that's why I love your message, Alberto, about the shift from cloud first to cloud smart, right? Because it's really about embracing a multi-cloud strategy.
Good. I think that answers. Another question from the audience. Julia, maybe this one can go for you. Do you see customers repatriating workloads from hyperscale public clouds?
Yes, this is there is clear evidence of cloud repatriation, but the reasons for this vary. According to IDC research, security, data privacy, and latency are top reasons, along with cost and data sovereignty for data and workloads repatriation. And it's happening for both early and late cloud adopters. But it doesn't mean that customers are repatriating all of their data. For example, referring to IDC research, 35% of regulated industries have repatriated all data. Meanwhile, 46% have repatriated some data from commercial public clouds. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good answer. I think we have time for just one more question. I ask a little bit of brevity in the answer, Patrick. But this is a final question for you. How do I get started, and what are some practical next steps that I can take in the light of a cloud adoption journey? Patrick?
Sure. Thanks, Alberto. Yeah, honestly, your panel and Yulia all talked about this, right? Number one, classify your data, right? Understand what's critical, what's not, right? And mitigate all risks, including the risks of data sovereignty and foreign access. Number two, if you haven't already done this, create a chief data privacy officer or a data guardian role in your organization. Number three, understand your data flows, right? And conduct the data protection impact assessments that Yulia talked about. Number four is shift your mindset from cloud first to cloud smart, right? And embrace this concept of multi-cloud. And the last and perhaps the most important recommendation would be, leverage a trusted partner, right? You've heard Yulia talk about her expertise around compliance and data regulations and privacy. There are partners like TietoEVRY who can become your trusted multi-cloud advisor to help guide you on this journey and help you protect your data. Those would really be the 5 recommendations, Alberto.
Thank you, and thank you for the brevity as well, Patrick and Julia. So I think it's time now to wrap up the event. Before finishing up, by the way, we want to ask you a few questions to get your feedback on what you thought about this livecast. This is your chance to have your say. So please use the Give Feedback tab under this stream window and kindly rate this event from 1 to 5, and feel free to give open feedback. Everything is welcome. Summing up, today we heard from Data Regulatory Insight from Sala Sastamoinen and Francesco Bonfiglio, shared with us what is Gaia-X initiative. But it is always great to hear the perspective and have the voices of our Nordic organizations who did great sharing their experiences and recommendations. Digital sovereignty is a right of the nations, organizations, and citizens to have control over their digital destiny and their data. Today, we got an overview of what can be done to strengthen the digital sovereignty in the Nordics. It's about digital openness, trust, and transparency. But over and above that, it is about values, foundational values such as democracy and freedom. So it's time to act. Thank you everyone for joining us, and see you next time.